We're live. I hear we're live, folks. Hello, NaNoWriMo. I'm Grant Faulkner. I'm Executive Director of NaNoWriMo. I'm super excited about today's webcast because this is a special Nano Prep webcast, and it's on a topic that I continue to be deficient on year after year. I need a tutorial every year on story structure, and today I think is just like going to be the best story structure webcast we've ever had. Seriously, I'm not joking. And I woke up today and I looked at the calendar, something that I should do more often in October to know exactly when NaNoWriMo is happening. And I looked, it's October 23rd, and I saw a tweet on Twitter, so just a little over a week from NaNoWriMo. So it's coming up. And somebody tweeted, is there enough time to plan my novel before November? Very ominous question. The short answer is yes. You've come to the right place. There's still enough time. And today's not even the deadline to plan your novel. You can do it way up till October 30th or 31st, trust me. And we're going to get to that place today. T.A. Hernandez tweeted, he said, he was celebrating, or he or she was celebrating that moment. He said that feel when you tweak one little plot detail and it helps 5 other things fall into place. That's the moment we're going to strive for today. So before we jump in, I want to say thanks, Save the Cat, who has sponsored this webcast. Thank you for supporting NaNoWriMo. If you don't know, Save the Cat, it started out as this famous screenwriting book written by this guy named Blake Snyder, and it really was the go-to book for screenwriters in terms of story structure. And I think film demands a more meticulous story structure than novels often do. But a lot of novelists went to Save the Cat for screenwriters to learn from it for their novels. And very fortunately, and I was one of those novelists, I have Save the Cat for screenwriters, but our special guest today wrote, Save the Cat writes a novel, a special book for novelists. And I really love this. It came out last year. I read it. I love using it. I use it for every novel when I start. It's just a wonderful brainstorming technique, I guess, for me. I read everything about all the story structure while I'm brainstorming my NaNoWriMo novel. So you can do that. And I don't even have to read the whole book. I think about the first third of it or so covers all the beats. And we'll ask Jessica to kind of define what a story beat is. But yeah, really recommend it. And what's more is that Save the Cat has story structure software that's really cool. And they are offering a 50% discount to the NaNoWriMo community. And to get that, just go to savethecat.com /NaNoWriMo. And I think that link is in the description. And Catherine, our trusty web producer, will also put it in the comments, so you guys can click on that. And before we dive in, I want to introduce our fantastic guest, Jessica Brody. Jessica knew from a young age that she wanted to be a writer. She started self-publishing her own books when she was just 7 years old. Her first novel was called The Puppy and the Kitty. I want to hear more about that.
I don't know if it follows the 15 beats or not, but it might.
Definitely a lot of narrative tension there. I know a lot of story structure, a lot of reversals, and it was complete with illustration. She has written and published many, many novels for teens, tweens, and adults, including her young adult novel Sky Without Stars, a sci-fi retelling of Victor Hugo's Les Misérables. That sounds super interesting. 52 Reasons to Hate My Father, A Week of Mondays, Addie Bell's Shortcut to Growing, The Geography of Lost Things, Better You Than Me, The Chaos of Standing Still, love that title, In Some Other Life, and 3 books in the Unremembered trilogy, among others. And perhaps more crucially, I've read that she loves speaking in a British accent.
Oh, no.
I just want to say, Jessica, if you want to do this interview in a British accent.
No, I won't do that. I will offend way too many people.
Really? Okay. I'm a little bit disappointed. Can you do maybe at the end just a little British accent?
We'll see. It might slip out. It sometimes will slip out without me even planning it. So
yeah,
fingers crossed.
Okay, just do it spontaneously. That's good. Well, I'm going to put on my reading glasses for this question to get it exactly right. Jessica, I read that when you first started writing, you had a drawer full of rejection letters that all basically said, great writing, no story. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah, we were just talking about rejection before we started. I'm very well versed in rejection. So I was trying to sell a novel, and it was sort of the same old story. Like I just kept getting rejected and rejected, and I was fortunate enough that the rejection was pretty. Was pretty widespread. Like it was pretty consistent among all the rejection letters, and it said, "Yeah, great writing, great voice, no story." I was really confused by that because I didn't really get the comment. I was like, of course there's story. There's 400 pages of story. I can print it out and stack it on my desk. But clearly I just didn't really get it. And that's when a screenwriter friend of mine actually gave me a copy of Save the Cat and said, this just came out. You should check it out. It's all about structure. I, as a novelist, didn't think that I needed structure because, I'm a novelist. Like, we don't use structure. We just write and the story just, flows. And he was sort of like, yeah, that's not working for you, is it? So long story short, I ended up reading the book and just kind of being sucked in, and everything about it and this method, the Save the Cat method, which we can talk about more, just made so much sense to me. And it just kind of illustrated story in a way that I'd never seen and never understood before. So I started using it to revise the novel I was trying to sell. And I ended up revising the novel, getting an agent for that novel, selling the novel in like 10 days after I got the agent. And I've sold 20 novels since, and they've been out in 23 countries. And I'm like, oh, I wish I could take all the credit, but I really do owe it to this, just being able to grasp what story is. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to write the book is I was like, I have to share this kind of like secret sauce with the world.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm curious, why not just why can't novelists just read Save the Cat for screenwriters? Why Save the Cat for novelists? What did you add to it to make it even better?
It's a good question. I would say first and foremost, the thing that people are getting out of this novel the most is the examples that I pull. So I basically, when I sat down to write this novel, obviously write this book, obviously I've been reading novels my whole life, but I analyzed and broke down like 50 novels through like kind of like the bestsellers throughout time. And there's a lot of them, but I chose like 50 and I started to just analyze them using the method. And then that whole book, it doesn't have any movie examples. It's all novel examples. So when I explain the beats, I'm explaining them using novels that you've probably read. So I think that really helps people kind of grasp the concept a little better and how it fits into a novel. And then beyond that, like, because I've been using this method for 12 plus years now, I've sort of morphed it a little and like expanded on some of the beats and gone a little bit deeper into some of the beats, the way that it makes sense to me and the way that I've seen it happen in, novels that we love. And so I go a little bit beyond what the original book does in relation to novels. And I've added a few little tips and a few little different ways of thinking of things that I think people are finding useful. So hopefully.
Yeah, I have to say, when I said I use Save the Cat as a brainstorming tool, that's part of it, is reading how you bring in other novels that I know as examples, and it helps me visualize my novel a little bit better. Like, for instance, one of the techniques in your book is whether the character is spiraling downward or rising and then falling, and it's just
spiral. I like the word spiraling. I should have used that word.
Oh, I could have sworn you did, but anyway.
Yeah, I like it.
It's just one of the like little nuggets of visualization that I got from the book, and it helps me kind of like think about my novel within that broad structure. But then you drill down into smaller parts of that overall structure, which is really helpful as well. And that brings up the next question: this crucial word, beat.
Yeah, the beats.
What is a beat?
What is a beat?
And what is a beat sheet?
Yeah. Okay. Good question. I have to note, I think your name is on the back of the book. Like, did you know that? Because you read a really early copy and gave us a really great quote. He's going to look.
Good plotters aren't born, says Grant Faulkner.
There you go. Grant Faulkner right there.
Read this book to be a good plotter.
The word beat is something we borrow from our screenwriting cousins. It's basically kind of referencing like a moment in a story. I call it like a plot point, is sort of another way you can look at it. So in the world of Save the Cat, there are single scene beats and multi-scene beats. So a single scene beat is like one moment or one scene when something really big or impactful happens that sort of shifts the story. I call them turning points, the single scene beats. So this would be like a beat called the catalyst, when, you know, like an inciting incident happens and something to kind of send the story in a different direction. There's also like a single scene beat called the midpoint, which is like another kind of stakes raising moment when something big twists the whole story. So we call those single scene beats. And then we have what are called multi-scene beats, which span multiple chapters, multiple pages, multiple scenes, where a progression of things are happening. So this is, for example, what you talked about with spiraling downward. So we have a beat called the bad guys close in, which, you know, oftentimes has sort of a downward spiral where like things are getting worse and worse for the hero. So a beat sheet is basically like a novel. I also call it a novel roadmap. So it's a list of these 15 crucial beats that make up the Save the Cat method, listed out in the order they should go. And not only that, more helpfully, how much time they should take and where they should appear in the novel. So in the novel version of the book, I actually break it down by percentages. So I say, oh, the catalyst should come by 10% of the novel. So if you're writing a 300-page novel, it should come by page 30. And then, you know, like a beat called the break into two should come around 20% of the novel. So I kind of tell you exactly where it should go. And these percentages are not only adapted from the screenplay version that Blake created, like he had, you know, by page 10 or 12, you should have a catalyst. They're not only just straight up adaptions. I actually took all of those novels that I read when I was analyzing books for writing this book. I took all of those novels and all of those beat sheets and I put them in a spreadsheet and I said, okay, where is the catalyst coming in all of these novels, and where is this, you know, bad guys close in starting? And I found that they were falling around the same spots. So the novel beat sheet, or the beat sheet, or the novel roadmap sort of exists whether writers know they're using it or not, which is kind of the cool thing about the Save the Cat method, is it's not really reinventing anything. It's not really teaching you this brand new way of plotting. It's basically just codifying a blueprint or a template that exists already and that has existed for a long time. So I used those existing novels to kind of give guidelines of where the different beats should go along the beat sheet.
Well, thank you for that meticulous analysis, because that's one of the things I loved about reading this book, is because it helped me like really think and have some concrete details, I guess, around these moments in a novel when the structure takes a new turn. And on that note, like when you were saying 15 beats, within that discussion, you mentioned things like when the novel breaks into two, or the catalyst. And so another way, there are 3 acts generally to most novels, right? And so I was wondering if you could kind of talk about a little bit about that 3-act structure, and then how the beats kind of support those umbrellas.
Yeah, sure. So the way I like to look at writing a novel is it's like taking a cross-country road trip. So for those of us who live in the United States, we know that we can drive from San Francisco to, you know, New York in like 5 to 6 days, right? If we look at it like, oh, I have to, you know, for the first day, I have to make it all the way to Colorado, which is about 1/3 of the way there. That's a really long way. You know, that's like a 15-hour drive, and we're probably never going to start because we're going to be like, that's just too far to go. Versus if we say to ourselves, oh, you know what, today I just have to get from like San Francisco to Reno. You know, okay, that's doable. It's a much shorter drive. So I think of the beat sheet as the same way. So novels, all stories can be broken down into 3 acts, which sort of breaks the story into, you know, roughly thirds. And traditionally, Act 1 is like where you set up the story. Act 2 is where you kind of bring a lot of conflict to the story, and then Act 3 is where you resolve the story. I found that the 3-act structure wasn't helpful enough, because it was like having to drive a really long distance to get to that next road mark, and I was like, I get lost along that way. There's just too much that could happen. So what Blake did in his original book is he broke down the 3-act structure into even further stops or beats along the way. So he says, okay, well, you have to get from the first beat, which is the opening image, you have to get through the setup to the catalyst. Okay, that's only 10% of the novel, not, you know, an entire third, and so on and so forth. So the 15 beats really just break the traditional 3 acts further down. And because of that, we do have beats called the break into 2, which is the break into Act 2, and the break into 3, which is the break into Act 3. And so we have those, those markers there as well.
Yeah, that's really great. And so we've been talking about beats, and I'm worried that some people might think that this is all, sort of this mathematical equation to put their novel together. And I want to refer to the old writing maxim that character is plot. And so can you kind of talk about how, something more, I don't know, the soul or the heart of the novel is revealed through the character. So how does characterization feed into this kind of story structure?
That's a terrific question. And I absolutely 100% believe that character drives the plot. It's why in the book, I actually, encourage writers to sit down and figure out their character first. And it's the first chapter of the book is all about the character. And sitting down and figuring out kind of 3 important things, which is 1, what are the characters' flaws? Or what are their big problems? Like what's sort of ailing them in their life? 2, what are their tangible goals or external goals? We also call these wants. Like what are they physically pursuing in their life? And in order to better their life, I would add. And then the 3rd thing I tell people to figure out before you start is what does the hero really need? So in essence, you've got this hero who has a flaw. They think they can solve that flaw by this tangible thing that they are pursuing. But actually, the real way they're going to solve this flaw is by this need or this underlying kind of life lesson that they have to learn along the entire journey. So that's kind of how that's a very quick way of explaining it. So I tell them, I tell writers, if you can figure that out first, if you can nail down these 3 things, your beat sheet will sort of it'll help you materialize your beat sheet a lot easier. Because really what the beat sheet is doing, what the 15 beats are doing, are they're guiding your hero through an arc. So we call the beat sheet, I said, a novel roadmap. It's a roadmap to change. It's a roadmap of transformation. So you have a hero who starts out, on one end of it in San Francisco, completely flawed and messed up with this, all these problems. And they go through this gigantic arc or transformation over the course of 15 beats. And they end up on the other end in New York, completely transformed. And I say a little bit less flawed.
I made it.
Yeah, I did it. So really, like, the character is driving the 15 beats, and you can't have a compelling novel without a compelling character arc.
Yeah. No matter what, bad things are going to happen in Colorado.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I used to live there. No, I love Colorado.
Me too. Well, I'm glad you mentioned goals, character goals. In the book, you actually identify 10 common goals, internal goals, motivating characters in novels throughout history. You don't have to list them all, but can you speak a little bit more to this and talk about a few goals, a few of the ones that compel you?
So just to clarify, the 10 universal goals are internal goals, or what I also call needs, not the external wants that I spoke of before. The external wants, They're sort of like, there's, kind of infinite. It just depends on what the character life looks like and what they're physically pursuing. So for example, like an external want would be like, I want my team to win like the dance competition. And that could be like something physically they're pursuing. And they think, oh, once I win this dance competition, I'll have notoriety. I will like prove to everyone that I'm worth something, etc. But then what the character really needs is one of these sort of internal universal life lessons. Like, actually what I really need is to learn that I'm valuable on my own, sort of a classic. That's sort of a classic example. So I list out like 10 universal themes or universal needs, if you want to call them that, that appear throughout a lot of novels throughout time. And I say that even though this is not a comprehensive list, I find that most universal needs or universal themes or life lessons tend to spring from one of these. So we've got things like trust, like learning to trust yourself, learning to trust others, learning to trust the universe, forgiveness of yourself, of others, of people who have wronged you, courage, learning to have strength, internal strength. So there's a bunch. Faith is also a very common one that, like, we see the theme of faith in a lot of religious novels, like The Kite Runner and The Shack. And so I kind of give you these 10 themes to kind of give you a jump start. And it's like, it sort of goes back to the whole adage that there's really no original story. It's kind of the same story being told over and over. And that's what I mean by these 10 themes are sort of being retold in different packages over and over. But underneath the package, like this kind of external facade of like the flashy action novel or the romantic suspense, underneath that is one of these universal themes.
Yeah, interesting. And now that we've introduced viewers to the concepts of beats and story structure and common goals, things like that, I'm curious how, when you first discovered Blake Snyder's book, how did it sort of rescue you as a novelist? Like, what were some specifics that you were, I don't want to say doing wrong, but how did it transform certain elements of your writing? And then how have you carried that forward? Like, I'm thinking oftentimes, like one of the rules of writing that I often hear is, don't put your character out into a city just walking around thinking about things. This happens to be the way the story structure I love to write novels with, is a good 50 to 100 pages of the character just kind of walking around. But the reason that there's advice not to do that is that there's just no action, there's no catalyst, there's oftentimes no conflict with that. So that would be one problem I would have to get over, or I think you could guide me more in terms of structuring that. But how about you? Like how to personalize this?
Well, I'm guessing that you really like movies like Before Sunrise, like where they're literally just walking around all through the whole movie. So I've had to actually kind of think back to like way back when, like what was some of the stuff I applied to that first novel. I think for me, a lot of the problem was pacing. Like when does that inciting incident come that sort of shakes the foundation under the character's feet and sends them in this new direction? I think my catalyst was probably coming like at 50% of the way through or whatever, and I was having way too much setup. I remember what really stuck with me was the wants and the needs, and making sure that want, like we were talking about before, that external goal is something really tangible that the hero is actively pursuing. I don't think I actually gave my character one of those, and I think that can be a real detriment to the story, because like you said, if your character's just sort of wandering around thinking about things, they're not doing things. And the quickest way to give your hero something to do is to give them an external goal. So, like, oh, I want to win that dance competition. Then, okay, every day they're going to practice. They're like, lifting weights, like whatever they're doing to kind of prepare. And I think the third thing that really kind of resonated with me is the title of the book is called Save the Cat. And a lot of people ask me, like, why is it called Save the Cat? Because actually, Save the Cat is not one of the beats. You would think that it would be one of the beats. It's not. It's actually just another little trick that Blake Snyder gives you in order to fix common plot problems. And one of the most common plot problems, especially with me, that I face is creating a character that's relatable from the start. And the reason that's a common problem is because basically when you start a story, you want to start a story with a hero who has somewhere to go. Like, so they're flawed, they've got something wrong with their life, which doesn't always lead to the most likable of characters, because like maybe their flaw is that they're selfish. And so, you're writing this selfish character that everyone's like, I don't want to read about that. That person's horrible. But in order to have like a satisfying arc, you need to start with a character who needs that arc, right? So Blake gave us this great tip, which is have your character in the first 10% of the story save a cat, meaning the character, the hero, does something redeemable, admirable, relatable, that basically makes you, as the reader or the moviegoer, stop and go, well, he's not all that bad. I mean, he did just save that cat, right? And it doesn't have to be literally saving a cat. It's just something like that. So I was getting a lot of feedback on my first novel that I had this unlikable character who was sort of depressed and nobody really liked her and nobody wanted to read where she was going. And I gave her a cat to save. Like, I gave her sort of that redeemable thing that at the beginning to kind of help pull you into the story. Like, well, she's got this going for her, so that's good. And I still use that trick all the time. Like, I still make sure that I'm actually, the NaNoWriMo book I'm writing right now that I just started prepping, is this character's a little bit bossy. She's sort of a control freak. She bosses people around. And it's not like the most likable character in the world. So I have her using her control freakness to take care of her mother, who's really stressed at work and forgets to eat, and so she's always like ordering her food and things like that, and like that's sort of my save the cat moment. So I still use it.
That's great. And, this character that I write about, who just walks around the city and thinks a lot, I'm gonna have him or her save a cat for the first 10% now.
And then they can think about saving the cat for another 100 pages. Yeah.
Exactly. Ponder that for another 10 pages.
Yeah.
Well, hey, I think this is a great moment to break and actually show the software in action. I know you've got a demo planned for us, and I want to just repeat again. Let me see. I am missing my page with the software URL, but there's a 15% discount for NaNoWriMo writers, and that is in the description of the YouTube webcast today, and Catherine's put it up in the comment section as well, I'm sure, the chat section. So Jessica, I'm going to hand it over to you with our fancy screen sharing device.
We got it to work. Is it working?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to show you guys some highlights of the Save the Cat software. It's actually been redesigned from the ground up, so it's a brand new software. And the thing that I love the most about this software is that it is built specifically for using the Save the Cat method. So if you are loving this method, if you're reading the book and going, this is really clicking with me, then this software is going to really help you implement the method and help you brainstorm and develop your novel, beyond just like a beat sheet. So this is the screen that you'll see when you create a new novel. You can also create a new movie, but we're going to focus on novels, obviously. So I'm actually going to use the example of one of the books I've already written. So it's a book called In Some Other Life. So I'm going to put that in the title up here. If you have a logline, which we talk about, a logline is a one-sentence description of your book. You can paste it in here. You can also wait and do it at the end whenever it feels right to you. And if you forget what a logline is, this software has these really great little info tabs that you can click and get little hints about the method, about what that box is for. So these are called Advice from the Cat, which I find really helpful. So I've got this story here about Kennedy Rhodes, who bumps her head and wakes up in a parallel universe where her life is different and she's made a different choice in her life. So I'm going to focus first on this left column here, this left sidebar. This is the beat sheet. So as you can see, it's got all the beats that I talk about in the Save the Cat book. It's got this handy, nifty calculator here. So whatever amount of pages you put in, it's going to auto-calculate where those beats go based on that math that we talked about earlier. So I like to start at 300 just because if I don't know how long my story is going to be, that's a really good kind of average for a young adult novel. So I start with 300. But if you were to put if you were writing, sort of a Game of Thrones, you might put 1,000 in there, and then it's going to automatically tell you where those beats should go. So I'm going to leave it at 300. But I'll just kind of show you, you can click on these beat cards, and you can start filling in, your beats as you figure them out. And again, you can always click on the info to remind yourself of what those beats are. So I'm just going to quickly fill in some details from that book, In Some Other Life. So in the opening image, the main character gets an email revealing some of her flaws, like that she's a control freak. Oh, that's another book I have about a control freak. This seems to be a theme for me. So yeah, I'm going to put that in there, and then I can go down here to the catalyst, and I can fill in that because I usually figure out my catalyst pretty early when I brainstorm. So a catalyst for this book is Kennedy walks in on her boyfriend kissing her best friend. Yikes! Bad, I know. And then after the catalyst comes the debate beat. This is one of those multi-scene beats where the character kind of reflects on. This is where you get to walk around thinking for a little bit. But the character reflects on the catalyst. So in this beat, I have Kennedy regrets her choices and wonders what to do next. Great. So that's just a quick overview of kind of the beat sheet over here. Now I want to show you the board. So I talk a little bit about the board in the Save the Cat book, but basically the board is a virtual cork board where you take your beats and you get to flesh them out as scenes or index cards and really expand upon your story. Now it's important to note, and we can talk a little bit more about this later, that this is not necessarily a software just for plotters versus pantsers. This is a software that you can use regardless of what phase of the novel writing process you're in. If you have pantsed your way through a first draft and now you need to revise it, this is a great tool to help you revise it and figure out, where scenes are going to go that you might already have, or new scenes that you need to write. So the board is broken down into 4 rows, and you can see the beats are listed right underneath where they should go. So the first row is Act 1. The second row is the first half of Act 2, all the way to the midpoint. The third row is the second half of Act 2, and the fourth row is Act 3. So as you can see, some of the cards are actually already built in. They've already given them to you, and these are the key beats that are in the beat sheet. So as you can see, we already filled in the opening image, and that's appeared here in the opening image card. So let's go over here to the debate. As I said, it's a multi-scene beat. So you're going to see multiple scenes of the character debating about what to do about the catalyst. So for example, we have our kind of primary card here for the debate. Kennedy regrets her choices. But let's say we want to add a second scene to that. So we want to add another scene with the character debating. So in this scene, I'm going to have Kennedy goes to Windsor Academy to beg for her place. So she regrets having given up her place at the Windsor Academy 3 years ago, and now she's going to go there and try to get it back. So I can add a little bit more description about that. So I can say like wants her place back, but there's no room, whatever. I can fill out whatever I want there. Now here's what's kind of cool. When you get into the scene detail, there's a lot of things you can do here. So for example, I'm going to add a location. So I'm going to add the Windsor Academy because that's a place that shows up a lot in the book. Now, when I try to add it, it says it's not already in there, but I can add it. So yeah, I'm going to add it. And now it becomes part of our location list, and we can tag locations to all of our scenes and that take place in those locations. But here's the part that I think is really cool. So in the world of Save the Cat, in order to help you with your novel's pacing, we say that every scene or chapter should have both an emotional change and a conflict. So those are given to you down here. If you can make sure that every scene you write has an emotional change and a conflict, then your pacing will rock. Like you will never have pacing issues. And I'm going to explain what that means. So the emotional change, let's just click and see what the advice from the cat says, is to identify the emotional change from the start of the scene to the end of the scene, which basically means that every scene should start with one emotion and end with a different emotion. And these don't have to be grand shifts, they just have to be subtle shifts. So for example, in my scene where Kennedy actually goes to the Windsor Academy to beg for her place back, she starts out as desperate and she leaves the scene as dejected. So that's the emotional shift there. And in terms of the conflict, it's basically outlining who has the goal and what's in the way of that goal, or who wins. So when Kennedy goes there, her goal is obviously to get her place back. So I can write that. And we represent the conflict by these little combating arrows there. And she can't get in because there's no space. So that's the conflict. Like I said, it doesn't have to be huge, but if every scene has these two things, then your plot will really move. So what I love about these scene cards is it gives it to you to put in. Again, you don't have to put it in, but if you are using this as a checklist to make sure each scene is dynamic, this is a great place to put that. And then I'm just going to show you really quick. There's lots of things you can do with the scene cards, but specifically, you can add characters. You can like kind of pin characters to the scenes. So I've already gone into my character list and I've added my main character, Kennedy Rhodes. So I'm going to just select her and I'm going to pin her to this scene. Great. So now she's in this scene. Awesome. So I'm going to X out of here. And that's just a quick kind of view of what the board would look like and how you could add a scene to the board. But before we end, I want to go back over here and show you some other features of this sidebar. So we were in the beats before, but if you click on this next tab, you see these are our characters. So we added Kennedy Rhodes already. And you can add so much detail about your characters. What I like about this software is like you can use it to like absolutely minimally just kind of lay out your board or just lay out your beats, or you can use all of the features, and there are tons of features. It's sort of like a buffet of features, and you just choose which ones are helpful to you. So for example, like I can put in her age, a description of her, And remember, we talked about the wants and the needs. This is where I was telling you the software is like specifically designed for the save the cat method. So this allows you to write down what the character wants, what the character needs. And we also talk a lot in the save the cat method about the things that need fixing in their life. So what are things in their life that are sort of problematic at the start? So there's little boxes where you can put some of those in here. You can also put in attributes like hair, hobbies, makeup. I mean, there's like I said, tons of features that you can use or not use. If you go over here and click boards, you can actually see where Kennedy appears because we've pinned her to that scene. So there's that scene there, which is helpful. You can also add relationships. Like I could decide, who's her love interest, who is she, at odds with, and I can add relationships there. And you can also add other characters, supporting characters, extras, as they say in the movies. And then this next tab are the locations. So you saw we added the Windsor Academy when we tagged that to the scene. Again, you can add descriptions, physical locations, history of the location. All of the characters and locations, you can pin images. So that, like, if you have like an inspiration board and you want to pin some images to that card, you can. Again, with the board, you can see where that location is occurring. And there's like really, I mean, like I said, there's like so many cool features. Like you can add the architectural style. Like I actually, in the book, the Windsor Academy is described as being colonial buildings. So I could add that if I wanted to. So that's sort of an overview of the software. As you can see, it's very robust, but also really simple to just kind of get your ideas down. Up here in the help menu, there's user guides, there's how-to videos on how to use some of the features. But this is also really cool. There are sample files. So Save the Cat has created full fleshed out boards for you as samples. So there's a couple movies, there's a TV show, and there's my own novel, The Geography of Lost Things, which you can download. I'm going to show you what that would look like. So this is actually a board that's been completely filled out. So over here, we've got all of the beats. We've got all of the cards. So every single scene in the novel has been laid out here. All of the characters are in the tab, all of the locations, etc. So that's for you to kind of look at and get inspiration and see how an existing novel might look. And yeah, and so that's the software. I hope you guys find it helpful.
That is super cool, Jessica. Thanks for showing us that. And I think my character who's walking around for 100 pages, if I use this, there's going to be a lot more action going on.
Yeah, you need a little bit more.
I love that basic concept that something needs to be fixed in your character as a kind of driving or an arc for the whole novel as well. That's something I really appreciate in the book and the software. And I forgot to mention this earlier, but if everyone could put your questions in the chat window, Catherine will then post them to me, and we'll try to get Jessica to answer all of them. So whether it's about the software or the Save the Cat method or writing in general, please ask questions, and we'll keep learning about story structure. So I'm going to read some right now. Heather Peterson says, I'd love to know how Jessica defines story beats versus story structure. How does she differentiate between the two? What do you say, Jessica?
I think they're sort of, the one fits into the other. So I would say that the structure of a story is made up of beats. So I think they're very intercorrelated. I don't think you can have a structure without beats, and beats together would create a structure. So I think we're just kind of calling things different things. Like an entire structure could also be called a roadmap, could also be called a beat sheet. And then the structure itself would be made up of beats. Unless there's a more specific definition that she wants, that would be the way that I would answer that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, she also asked, do certain stories have specific beats that other stories may not? I guess maybe she's asking, do certain stories have 20 beats or 30 beats?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a really great question. And the answer is sort of, but not really. And I will elaborate. So all stories have 15 beats. That's sort of the argument behind the method, is that all stories can be broken down into these same 15 beats, whether the author knew that they were using those beats or not. Because I've found them in books as old as Austen and Dickens and all of that. However, another thing that we talk about in the book that Blake Snyder also kind of codified in movies is the existence of story genres. So when I say the word genre, in terms of the Save the Cat method, it's not like it's not your mother's genres. It's not like sci-fi and horror and mystery. Those we call we call them genres of tone. These are genres of story or story type. So we have genres like Dude with a Problem and Superhero and Monster in the House and Fool Triumphant. And all of those story types, there's 10 story types, and they all have their own set of what I call ingredients. And it's basically like A Dude with a Problem is a story that has to have an ordinary hero who's not expecting anything magic, or not magic, but not expecting anything big to happen to them. And then there's a sudden event that thrusts them into the third ingredient, a life or death battle. So you have books like The Martian. I classify The Hate U Give as a dude with a problem. The Hunger Games is a great dude with a problem. So that's what I mean by the genres. And each genre has these set of 3 ingredients to follow. So in essence, there's different types of stories that have different kind of features to them or elements to them, but all the stories also have those 15 beats.
Yeah, that's so cool. I really love the genre section just for that reason. It kind of made me think about story types in different ways.
It's really helpful for breaking down what you're trying to do.
Yeah, exactly, and brainstorming as well. So this one comes from Chang Gibson. Can you use the software if you have 2 point of view characters, 2 different point of views, I think he's asking. She is asking.
Yes. So what you can do is the software, I'm not going to go back to it because I already closed it, but the software has, in each card, you can actually create labels in the cards, like colored labels. So there was on each card along the side, there's like a place for different labels. So there's probably multiple ways you could do the different POVs, but the way I would do it is I would create a color for each character, and then I would create those cards and label the color that the POV is in. So if you've got like a guy and girl POV, I would put, like the guy would be yellow and the girl would be green. And for each catalyst or for each scene, you would label whose POV it is. Now it's important to note, this is a great like segue into kind of a little bit of a lesson. I tell writers that if you have multiple points of view, you should have multiple beat sheets. So every character who's worthy of a point of view in your novel, and I mean more than just one chapter of a point of view, but an actual full book point of view, is also deserving of their own story arc. And if they don't have a story arc, then they probably don't deserve a POV, if that makes sense. So in order to track both of those POVs and both of those characters' arc, they should probably have their own beat sheet, which means they're going to have their own 15 beats. That doesn't mean the beats won't overlap. A lot of times beats do overlap, like they can maybe have the same catalyst, or maybe they have the same all is lost, which is the rock bottom. But they do both have to have the beats. So when you were putting 2 POVs into the software, you would have 2 catalyst cards, 2 debate cards, and things like that. And I do get into multiple POVs a little bit more in the book with a full beat sheet example of that.
That's great. This comes from Flick B. Can the beat sheet timing be edited?
I get this question all the time. Yeah. I get nervous saying like, yeah, just chop it up and rearrange it and do whatever you want. Like I get a little nervous because there's a reason the beat sheet is laid out the way it is. And that's because it's the way that's, those stories have been analyzed that way. And like, that's the way the stories have been working. So I wouldn't recommend putting like, the all is lost in the first 10% and the catalyst at the end, like that doesn't work. However, when I give you guys guidelines for like 10%, 20%, those are guidelines. They can be shifted a little bit. And the reason I give you 10 full beat sheets in this book is so you can see that the beats don't always fall at, the catalyst doesn't always fall at 10%. Sometimes it falls at 8, sometimes at 14. Some extreme cases, then I think it was like 1984, like his catalyst is like 35% of the way through the novel. But he does things, George Orwell does things to help move the plot along until you get to that catalyst. So there are always exceptions, but the beats, for the most part, usually fall in the same order.
Yeah. I'm going to combine these two questions. Michelle K asks, is this software also adaptable for screenplays or short stories? And Karen Alanis says, can this be applied to narrative nonfiction?
Oh, well, the answer is yes for all of it. It originally was built as a screenplay software, and the reason they redesigned it from the ground up for this new version is because they wanted to make it friendly for novelists, because like novelists were starting to use the method even before I wrote this book, and then even more so after the book. So they really wanted to redesign it with novelists in mind. So absolutely, screenwriters can use it. You were sort of the founders of the software. In terms of short story and narrative nonfiction, anytime there's a story to be told, I don't care how long it is, you're going to have beats. You're going to have 15 beats because you're going to have to track some kind of story or some kind of arc. So you would open the software and you would put in 20 pages, and it would calculate where those beats go based on 20 pages. So yes, absolutely to all of it.
Great. I agree. Story is a story, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. Yeah. So this comes from Christine M. Can you add beats in your left column? For example, when your story becomes more complicated, more ups and downs, etc.
I don't know the answer to that, actually. I've never tried to do that, so that would be a good question for the support team. Like, I would go to, the link to buy the software, savethecat.com, and I would ask the support team about that. I'm not sure. I know you can add as many cards as you want. I'm willing to guess that you probably can't add beats just because those are the 15 beats. But you could always use the board to expand beyond those 15 beats.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% certain.
Here's another one that might be for the support team, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Roxanne G asks, can we use this software on a tablet?
Oh, again, not 100% sure, but I think there's an app. I don't want to promise, but I think that I haven't used the app version, but I think there's an app.
Yeah, good. We'll guide viewers to Save the Cat to check it out. That's probably the product details there.
Yeah.
Sarah McNesby asks, what would you say are the main difference of beats for a tragedy versus a hero wins story?
So that's a good question, and it kind of ties back to what we were talking about before with the genres. So I would say that they have the same 15 beats. I mean, they're not, the detail of those beats are not the same, but they're both going to have a catalyst, a debate, a break into two, a midpoint, all of those beats. However, they're probably going to fall into different story genres. So traditionally, like the fool triumphant genre is sort of an underrated underdog hero who goes up against some kind of establishment and proves a hidden worth to society. So like a great example is Dumplin', Wonder, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, Bridget Jones's Diary. People, sort of it's triumph of the underdog is those stories. So like a hero who wins. I'm not sure, like tragic love story, it sort of depends on the love story. But typically love stories fall into our buddy love genre, which is when you have two incomplete heroes who kind of come together to make each other, to help each other with their flaws. And there's usually some sort of complication that's keeping them apart or causing conflict. So a great example would be like The Fault in Our Stars, where you've got these two heroes who are helped by one another, but they've got this great complication of cancer. And that's the big conflict between them. So I would say that, again, 15 beats are not going to change, but it's probably going to help you to determine what genre your story's in, and that will help you determine what elements your story should have.
Yeah, we got a lot of great questions rolling in. Muses of Melody asks, is it possible to write a compelling story using this method without a traditional antagonist? So, for example, can the protagonist be their own antagonist?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think most of my books don't have a traditional antagonist. And a lot of the books I actually break down in Save the Cat don't have a traditional antagonist. A great example would be like the Kite Runner. Like, I mean, his biggest villain is himself and his own demons over this horrible thing that happened to him when he was a kid. So I think absolutely. And an important thing to note is that stories can have external bad guys and internal bad guys. So an external antagonist and an internal antagonist. You don't always have to have an external bad guy or an external antagonist. A lot of stories don't. But you always have to have internal bad guys. And those are sort of those like pesky flaws that are keeping the hero down and keeping them from achieving their goals and keeping them from, winning until the end when they finally combat them.
Yeah, good question, good answer.
Good question.
Comes from Jennifer Smith. How do you use this structure for planning a trilogy?
Oh gosh, I get this question so much. Someday I will write a book all about Save the Cat Writes a series.
There you go.
I will spend the rest of my life reading series. So absolutely, the beats work for series, and I talk a little bit about it in this book. But basically, a series as a whole is its own story, right? So I argue that a series itself would have 15 beats. So traditionally, when you're writing a trilogy, I would say that the beat sheet would get broken up by act. So when you look at famous trilogies, the first movie is sort of the setup of the world, and it kind of ends with the hero deciding to act and sort of join the world. In the second installment is usually kind of the act two. It's like where all of the kind of the premise of the world happens and all of the big action and big conflict happens, and it usually ends in a dark spot, which is like the end of act two is dark. And then the third installment is usually sort of a resolution. It's where the big final battle happens. It's where all the kind of the plot lines get resolved. So it feels very much like an act three. So I say with a trilogy, it breaks down really well. And you can look at like the Hunger Games as sort of the perfect trilogy in terms of those three acts. And it sort of works the same, whether you're writing 4 books or 7 books, it's just basically where it breaks down along the series beat sheet.
That's so cool. This one comes from Lance Oldham, and I bet this is a position where a lot of NaNoWriMo writers are in right now. Is the Save the Cat process more applicable for second drafts and revision rather than first drafts, especially when writing for NaNoWriMo? And when I was watching you do the demo, I actually thought sometimes we get hung up on these terms, like it's an either or between planning and pantsing, but I thought Save the Cat looked great for planters, which is what I am. Somewhere in the middle. I just need some direction,
Yeah.
and then I'll fill in the gaps. But yeah, if you could answer this question.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think everyone's sort of a plantser in a way. I think of myself as a plotter, but like things come up as I'm writing that I didn't expect, and then it causes me to have to pants a little bit until I figure out where I'm going. And I think pantsers the other way. Like there's certain things that you kind of know are going to happen, or you get to a point in the book and you go, oh, I really want this for like the last scene, and I'm just going to write it down to remember. Well, guess what? You just plotted. So when you did that. So I think we're all sort of a little bit of both, but there is sort of a spectrum, right? And there are the people that like to sit down, plot their novel in advance, and then go and write it and see what happens. And then there's the people that want to just kind of get an idea and run with it, and then come back and revise it later. The thing that I like to say is that the structure gets added in somewhere. Like it's either going to get added in up front while you're writing, after draft 17, like it's going to get added. Otherwise, the story is not going to work. So the Save the Cat method and the software can be used regardless of how you go about it. Like if you want to sit down and like really plot out your novel, it may be a little bit late to start doing that at this point, but you can get some really good ideas down, at least like a bare bones, before November 1st. You can use the software to plot it. If you want to just get an idea and run with it, NaNoWriMo is all about constant word count and just going forward, never looking back, which kind of leans itself more to pantsing. Then you can definitely either use the software along the way or at the end in December. What are we calling it? Revise-ember is my term that I came up with. Or no, it was Relax-ember, Revise-annuary.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I coined those. You heard it here first, you guys. No, kidding. Yeah, so whenever you are revising, you can come back and start looking into the structure a little more. But I think it's really all about the way you do it. So I've been outlining my novel for NaNoWriMo for the past month. So I'm like ready to go. Of course, it's all going to change once I start, as it always does.
Yeah, I was going to say just a little side note, since you said that it might be veering on being too late to actually plan your NaNoWriMo novel. I think a year ago on exactly this weekend, I sat in a cafe with your book for about 4 hours and
There you
outlined
go.
my novel. So I
There
think
you
it
go.
can be done. Yeah.
Not too late. It's not too late, you guys. You can do it.
Yeah. I'm going to go back to a technical question. You don't have to know this, but we'll guide Paul to the Save the Cat page if you don't. Has the software been tested with screen readers for blind accessibility?
Oh, I'm sorry. I do not know the answer to that, and I wouldn't even want to try to guess. But it's a good question to direct to the Save the Cat support team.
Okay, good. Let's see. I'm going to pull up another one. Well, here's a question just about story structure in general. Claire Boyle asks, would Harry Potter be considered an underdog triumph story?
That's a great question. I break down the first Harry Potter in Save the Cat Writes a Novel. I give you the full beat sheet for the first book. And that book I put into the superhero genre. So the superhero genre is a sort of someone who is special, who has to come to terms with the fact that they're special. And they're usually up against a nemesis of a self-made nemesis. So I think it fits perfectly with the Harry Potter, Voldemort, whole thing. That being said, I find that different books in a series can fit into different genres. So just because the first book fits into one genre doesn't mean they all have to fit into that genre. So, for example, the Hunger Games, I classify the first book as a dude with a problem, the second book as an institutionalized, which is another genre I talk about in the book, and the third book as a superhero. Because that's when she becomes the Mockingjay, as the special thing that she has to accept who she is. So I haven't really thought about the rest of the Harry Potter series. I probably should sit down and classify all of them, but the first book is definitely a superhero.
Cool, that's great. Cassie Fry asks, is it okay if my inciting incident doesn't happen until the end of Act 1 and the debate happens over a single scene? My Act 1 is on the longer side because it's dual point of view and they interact in Act 2.
So I think what Cassie's dealing with is what I like to call the case of the multiple catalysts. So a lot of times we'll have more than one inciting incident. So I've seen books that start with an inciting incident and then have a second inciting incident that sort of pushes the hero into Act 2. I've seen books that have a catalyst right at 10%, and then they'll have a second smaller catalyst at the end of Act 1 that sort of triggers the break into 2. So I think that's totally fine, but I definitely think that you're going to want to have some sort of movement, event, inciting incident, action thing that happens around 10%. Even if it's not the thing that finally pushes your hero into the second act, because otherwise you end up with 20% of the novel, which can be a lot of pages depending on how long your novel is, with nothing that happens. And you don't want to fall into the critique of nothing happens in this book. Depending on where you are in your career, or what your path is, if you're trying to get an agent, a lot of agents will only read the first 30 pages before they decide if they want to read more, which is why it's good that the catalyst comes usually around page 30. So you want to make sure you're giving that agent something exciting that's happening.
That's great. And but going back, so we got 2 minutes left roughly for the webcast today. Just going back to that question of how much time does one need to plan a novel. I think it differs with every novelist. When I said that I spent an afternoon last year exactly on this date, essentially, I think in an ideal world for me, I'm doing that on October 1st, and I get some sort of rough, sketch of 15 beats. And then I spend the month letting all those ideas marinate and taking some notes. But I don't need a super meticulous or rigid or detailed outline. But on the other hand, I've heard of authors, I think James Patterson always has about a 20-page single-spaced outline for his novels. So I just wanted to hear from you, Jessica. How much, you said you've been planning all month. What is the end product of that with the Save the Cat method for you?
So I'm going to share something I have not shared yet with my followers or any of my fellow writers, is that I'm actually working on revamping my process a bit. So I found, going back, I just finished probably the hardest book I've ever written, which was the sequel to Sky Without Stars, and it had to be rewritten way too many times, and it's a very long book. So it was a very, very arduous process. And I thought, I can't do this again. Like this was too crazy. And so I went back, and I've written now 20 novels. You would think I would have figured this out by now, but I didn't. I went back and I looked at like, what were the novels that were sort of the easiest? And I don't mean like I had no problems, but just sort of the smoothest process with the least revisions. And I figured out that they were the novels where I wrote really in-depth synopses. So not just outlines, but like paragraph written out. So each chapter kind of had like a paragraph, even, roughly. And they were like long, like this first book, Sky Without Stars, which went pretty smoothly. We didn't do massive revisions on. I had a 50-page synopsis for that because I sat down and I figured out the story like beat for beat before I started writing. That's just how I think my brain works. And then another book I wrote, Addie Bell's Shortcut to Growing Up, I sold this on like a 30 to 40-page synopsis because I just was like, well, I'm going to sell it on an idea. Better have the idea all fleshed out. That book also went very smoothly. And I figured out that the books that kind of really gave me trouble were the ones that I either sold on like a sentence or I started writing with just like a few thoughts. And I ended up having to revise a lot because I would get all these ideas along the way. So I found that actually for me, writing a thorough, fleshed out synopsis is very helpful. That's my theory. So this NaNoWriMo is my first time actually implementing that theory. And I've been spending the month writing the synopsis. It's 30 pages long, and I'm going to see how it goes. So
that's great. Well, maybe we can follow up with you, Jessica, after NaNoWriMo or sometime early the next year and see how it goes with that new approach. That's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. And just as a reminder to everybody, thank you for joining us. Happy writing in November. Happy planning now. And once again, Save the Cat is offering a 15% discount on the software that Jessica demoed today. You can go to Save the Cat. Gosh, I need glasses for this. This is crazy.
Don't get it wrong.
SaveTheCatWritesANovel.com /NaNoWriMo and get that discount. And the link is in the description here too. And beyond the software, always have a good writing hat with you. Helps a lot in those tough moments. And always have writing companions with you too, whether it's at a NaNoWriMo write-in or in the forums on our website or with Corgi, Space Corgi here. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks for joining us and happy writing. Thank you, Jessica.
Good luck.